What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creators Tim and Kat. Welcome to the show.
Thank
Hello.
you.
I'm
Thanks for having us
excited.
on.
I'm excited to talk to you. You both were connected with me through a friend of the show, Jay, called Guyan, and so he's like, "Can you have these creators on?" I was like, "Absolutely," and I'm excited to talk to you both about just your work and your time in comics. But as I always ask all my guests, how did you get into comics? Like, did you always have a love for comics growing up, or was this something later in life?
Tim, do you want to go first?
I can if you want me to. Sure. I've been into comics reading and then comics fandom for, as long as I can remember. I was a little kid, learning to read on comic books. But in the 70s and 80s, I was rather involved in comic fandom and fanzines and mini comics and all that sort of thing. And it led to my first couple of jobs in comics, which was I created Captain Catnip for the second issue of Charlton Bullseye before they went out of business. And that led me to Fantagraphics, and I had a regular feature, the Beagle, in Critters Comics for several years with Fantagraphics before that got canceled. And then I stepped away for a long time. I had a regular paying job and raising a family and all like that. But by the mid 2000s, I realized I was really, really missing creating. And I discovered print on demand. And that got me back into it because I didn't have to print massive quantities of the books. I could just print small quantities and take them to conventions and keep them in print. And so that's when I started doing all of these things again. I've been doing it since.
Yes. What about you, Kat?
So I've been doing comics since I was in middle school. I was one of those kids in the history class that would be doodling like basically miniature versions of what we were talking about in class to entertain my friends. And we would pass it around. We called it the Little Red Book, and it was just full of just goofy stories from my friends and I. So since, yeah, easily seventh grade, I've been drawing comics. That is not what I went to school for, but I ended up falling back into comics when the State Department cut all of our jobs. So, or a massive amount of them. So I went into comics because it's my hobby, and I had kept up with it as a hobby and done it at night, like so many other people do while you have a full-time job. And basically, through interesting circumstances, Tim and I started doing the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities with our friend Christina back in 2020. We got the idea for it because before I became a cartoonist full time, I am a haunted history writer, and I would write about the strange places. I have two books. They're actually above me. There's Haunted Ohio Crime is the most recent one, and I went to locations all across Ohio where we had ghosts where true crime had happened, and I would tell these ghost stories at our drink and draws, and everyone's like, "That is fucking awesome. Can we do a comic about that here in Cincinnati?" And I'm like, sure. So we ended up coming together with all of our strengths and creating the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, which we can talk about later. I also do um, basically early reading or early reader stories that are all horror, and founded Corpse Flower Press, which is a horror, occult, and supernatural themed publishing company of comic books. And I'm the editor of that, and we have several things, including Frogman Funnies, which we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Frogman Funnies, that was kind of what was approached. I know at the time of this recording, you guys are about to head to the Frogman Festival in Loveland, but when our listeners are hearing this, you will have already gotten to experience that. But talk to me about Frogman Funnies.
Oh man,
You want to start
we're
it off, Kat?
sure. So I have our wonderful early reader copies right here. So, beautiful. They're so beautiful. So last year was the inaugural Frogman Festival, and it was in Mason, Ohio at the Great Wolf Lodge. And Tim, you didn't go by, but you heard a lot about it because I'm super chatty.
Yeah, I missed getting a table there. It wasn't on my radar.
Yeah, it's I knew Jeff. He is a cartographer. He's the man who puts together the entire festival. And he, many years ago, put together my favorite map of all time. It is a gigantic wall-sized map. It's easily 6 foot by 6 foot. And it is every single cryptid, haunted location, and UFO sighting in the state of Ohio. And I have that map. And and we've been friends ever since he came out with that. And basically, when he put the Frogman Festival together, he knew that we had the Cabinet of Curiosities. He knew that I had my podcast, and he was like, "Hey, will you come by and do this?" I'm like, "Sure." So it was great. I love it because there were so many people who cosplayed as cryptids. Like Mothman, there was a lot of Loveland Frogman, and my favorite was the Fresno Nightwalker. If you don't know what it looks like, it's just a pair of legs with eyes on top, basically. But the person wearing the costume put squeakers in their shoes. So the entire convention, you could hear them walking around going, "Rah, rah, rah, rah." It was adorable. I loved it. Talked about it with Tim, and Tim's like, "I have to go next year. We'll find something to publish." And that's how we came up with Frogman Funnies. So, Tim, how did you find the stories that are in it?
Well, Frogman Funnies is sort of an outgrowth of a book I've been doing for 10 years called Sham Comics. And in a nutshell, it's public domain comic stories from mostly from the 40s and 50s, but I've found even more recent ones the more I do research. As I say, they're in public domain. I take them, scan them, erase every single bit of text, but leave the panels alone. I don't touch the artwork. And then I write a humorous story to go with those pictures. So Sham has been really popular. And in doing some research, I was looking at UFO comics in particular, and I actually found some public domain stories, two with Frogman, two with Mothman, and then I rounded the book out with just an alien invasion story that I really liked the art in. And so I took all of those, I rewrote them in these really silly, stories that go with the pictures. And I think the book's going to be, a big success. It was a whole lot of fun to do.
It's so funny because in prepping for the interview, you all had sent me some of the PDF so I could experience, so I could understand what we were talking about and stuff. And I missed the whole point at the beginning that they were public domain comics that then you would read. So I'm like, all right, hold on. It says this art was published here. I'm like, I'm so confused. And they're like, so I'm Googling. I'm like, wait, so is comic art? I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, this is like Mystery Science Theater, but comic form. And I'm like, this is brilliant.
Exactly. That's what I compare it to when people are asking me, what are these books like? My goal with them is to do them so well, the typography and the production of them, that people will look at them and be confused. I want them to think for a few minutes that, hey, is this really a golden age comic book? How can they be saying all this awful stuff?
Yeah. Well, congratulations, because it worked. As I was prepping for the interview, I'm like, wait a second. I was like, did he write this? What is it drawn? I'm like, oh, I see what was done. And it makes sense because the dialogue is a lot more modern dialogue. And I think there was even at one point, maybe it was something from Sham that was like a Tesla mentioned or something. I'm like, all right, there's something's off.
Yeah, there's a Tesla that gets driven into the swamp in Frogman.
That was it. Yeah.
It was great. So for our listeners, basically the first story is called "I Was a Teenage Frogman," and the art is Steve Ditko from 1976. And I'm just I am a Doctor Strange fan, so I'm like, yes, Steve Ditko. But yeah, it's all declassified and rift stories. And I love how Tim found stories from all over Golden and Silver Age time that are now public domain, and managed to, especially with the Frogman stories, weave them together. And he would come and consult me because I love urban legends, ghost stories, and cryptids, of course. And he's like, what about this idea? Would this work with the story? Would people who love cryptids that they like this, especially with Frogman and Mothman. Those
Yeah.
are my favorites.
Yeah, frequently I ask, am I going too far?
And I'm like, no, keep going. It was fun. And it took us several months to put it together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you come up with the scripts, Tim?
It is a really weird process. It's hard to explain because one, I try never to read the original story. I don't want to know what the writer intended. So I usually take all the text out first without ever really reading it. And then just look at the blank pages. The artwork suggests things to me, or I might have an idea that I want to pursue. And I don't work with an outline. I never know how the stories are going to end when I start them. And sometimes I'm really surprised by the time I get to the end of the story and it takes some turn I wasn't expecting. I have to think on the fly and make a lot of changes as I go to kind of keep it fresh.
So do you like, since you're processing that as you kind of go along of like, how does this panel speak to me? What would I say? What am I interpreting? Almost like, one of those bad lip reading videos, right? Like where you're like,
yes.
I gotta process what they're saying. How often do you like, you start to write something and you go and you get all the way done? You're like, no, I got to go back and change it because now I'm seeing something. Does it change once you get towards the end, or is it kind of like, no, as I go along, it pretty much stays?
Surprisingly, I don't have to go back and rewrite very often. Every once in a while, I'll run into a problem or just a stone wall, a dead end. Then I usually just put the story aside. If I have the luxury of time, I'll put the story aside for a week or so and then come back to it. And almost always then I've got some fresh idea to continue on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was editing through it, because I'm the editor of this book, there were multiple times where I would get lost in what I was reading and forget I was supposed to be editing it and laughing out loud and then coming back and going, oh, wait, I have a job to do. Not that I shouldn't be enjoying it, but I need to be kind of reading it in a different way. And that happened about 3 times reading this book, Tim. You got me laughing.
Oh, that's why I can't edit my own work.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And I go back and reread stuff that I've written, say a year or two ago, and I still find it funny because it comes from such a weird subconscious place. It's not like any other writing I've tried to do.
Yeah. So, Kat, you talked about editing this book. How is it then as an editor? Like, because I know you edit a lot of other comics and stuff as well, but like for something like this, where it's, taking a golden age story that's already there and now with just the word, like what's the process different for you as an editor compared to like a normal comic?
Well, it's making sure that the script that's in front of me and the images are kind of at least meshing enough that they make sense in the story, and that and basically that not too much is being jammed into word balloons and is paced well enough. So it's kind of interesting. I know you've talked to several other creators. I'm not sure how many other editors you've talked to, but when I'm looking at books, I'm making sure that aesthetically it's not hurting the eyes of whomever's reading it, because you don't want to look at a page and go, oh, unless it's like horror and there is a lot of blood and guts going everywhere where you're just like, oh yeah, but you want to make sure that everything, the kerning and the lettering is good and that fits with the aesthetic of the page, because even though these are all older comics, the aesthetics are different from decade to decade, and you want to make sure that all marries together. You want to make sure there aren't any spelling errors, grammar errors, and that it reads smoothly. And those are all things I'm taking into consideration when looking at each one of these pages. And yeah, it especially with the Frogman, because there's I Was a Teenage Frogman and the Frogman Cometh are the 2 stories that go hand in hand. And Tim, these are 2 different stories. The first one is from 76, and the second one was actually from 1954. But if you read them, it's one after the other chronologically within their own story. They were published in completely different magazines, written by completely different people, but Tim's writing merges them really well. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm editing through these.
Yeah, they refer to each other. And that's one of the things that I really pay a lot of attention to, because I enjoyed lettering. I like designing the logos and all of that. So I pay a great deal of attention to matching fonts up with the time period that I'm working in. I try not to overfill the balloons, you know, so I've seen a lot of people that do a similar kind of thing, and one balloon will have teeny, teeny, teeny type, and the next balloon, because they don't have to say as much, has big type. I approach it as a letterer, where I choose a size and a style for each story. Each story is unique. And that's where I do all of my rewriting, is in the balloons itself. I will rewrite a balloon over and over again until I get just exactly the right amount of words and it says exactly the right thing.
I was just going to say, I think that's such an important aspect that gets overlooked a lot in comics. I feel like letters don't get the love that they deserve in comics as much. And I have a lot of friends that are letters. One of the things we talk about is a good letter you don't notice, but a bad letter you do. And it kind of sucks for them. But that is something like you talk about, of like having the different fonts like that would drive me as a reader insane. And I'd like, I can't do it. So kudos for you of figuring out how to fit that into the balloon to make your story still make sense and tell the story you want to tell.
That goes back to what I was saying about, I want somebody to look at this and read the story and then go, wait a minute, they couldn't have really said this in 1954. You know, because I want it to look that convincing.
And you did it, Tim.
Well, thank you, Pat.
Yeah, what I was going to mention was that with the word balloons and how Tim has to fit them all in, back then there wasn't the education for how to make comics and comics theory that we have now, and all the ability to just go on YouTube and find somebody who's like, this is how you properly write a word balloon and the spacing and all that. So fitting modern speech into those word balloons is also tricky, and Tim is masterful at it.
I love making it conversational. You know, I'm trying to get points across, and I'm trying to make jokes. That's important too, but I also like it to read well. And I do try and construct it so that it reads as a story. It's funny, but it still reads as a story. I don't just throw something in that doesn't really fit the tone or the message of the story.
And the part that I loved, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it was in the second Frogman issue that you were talking about. And there's this point where it was kind of like, is this trope in comics, or is this another trope in comics? And I was like, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. Because I then did a flip back and go, wait, oh, hold on, where are we at in the story? So like those are things that I think like a reader who is a fan of comics will appreciate those moments too.
I break the fourth wall a lot, and I will, you know, add like a commentary on the history of comics. It helps if you know a lot about comics, and yeah, you can follow the tropes and the in references and things like that.
And you mentioned it a couple times on the show, and I want to hop into the other book that we were talking about here. But before we get off this, I know people are going to be able to pick this up at the Frogman Festival in Loveland, Ohio. But if they're listening to it after that, how can people get a hold of this book?
All of my books, I've just moved all of them over to indieplanet.com. It's a side business for Kablam, the printer. And they offer print-on-demand copies, physical copies of the books, as well as really cheap digital downloads. So you can just download the books and read them. You know, my stuff is usually 99 cents a piece for the downloads. But Frogman just went up on their site, I think last week. So it's going to be available online through them.
And then the other option is you can purchase them through our publisher's website, which is corpspress.bigcartel.com. And that's all me fulfilling those books. So I'll be sending them to you. And yeah, and also at other conventions. So if Tim or myself are at a convention, just look for Corpse Flower Press, and that will be me. And yeah, we'll have books there.
Fantastic.
or Hooha Comics, and that'll be me. I'll be taking them there, and I'm also working on an Etsy store as well.
Well, well, as someone in the Columbus area, I know there's a lot of indie comic cons and stuff around. So hopefully, I'll be able to get some physical copies via that way soon. Because it's just so good. But one
Thank
of the
you.
things that you mentioned already on the show was the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosity anthology. Like, I know it kind of bred off of your love for the stuff that you were already creating, and people, you were saying your draw, your drink and draws, that inspired this. People like, I want to hear these stories. So then, where did this kind of process to get this? What is it? What is this anthology? And then, how did you guys kind of come about putting it together?
You want me to go, Tim?
Yeah, you start.
All right. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've written haunted history books. And when we got interested in doing the actual first issue, which is back up there, um, basically I looked up and made dossiers of the most popular ghost stories, urban legends, and creepy cryptids of the area. And then we had everyone at our drink and draw was like, hey, I'm totally interested in participating in this. Jay was another one, Jay Callaghan. He wrote the first story, which is Mermaids of the Ohio River, detailing a 1890s encounter with mermaids in the Ohio River outside of Lawrenceburg, Indiana. And this was written about in the Cincinnati Enquirer. And so he had his artist Dylan Spieg do the artwork, and it's wonderful. The way that they illustrated it, it looks like wood block carving.
Mm.
So we have all bunch of different local creators that wrote and illustrated the stories. And where it's different from just the traditional retellings is that it's done in our creators' local voices. So it's not going to be exactly 100% how you've heard these stories, but it's going to be very familiar. And for our second issue with the Crosswick Snake or the Crosswick Monster, that one was the Warren County Historical Society had heard about the first issue because we kickstarted that and was on a bunch of local news about it. So for the second issue, they sent us this story and they're like, hey, we found this 1892 story that comes from our county, but no one's heard of this creature. Do you want to write about it? So they let us know about the Crosswick Monster, and actually two different teams of creators retold the story, but in their own voices. One of them is this fantastic Twilight Zone-ish retelling, and the other one is a much more humorous retelling of the story using other cryptids in the state. And they're very different flavors of the same story. They work really well together. And that one is one of our perennial favorites.
Mm.
And for our third issue, which is kickstarting this October, yet again, somebody else, this time it was historian Greg Hand in Cincinnati, let us know about a sea serpent that was seen in 1878 by 25 people. Swimming underneath the Roebling Bridge in the Ohio River. So that one is also getting adapted as well. And then I just learned about the Ohio River Octoman, but Octoman's going to have to wait for the next issue.
Octoman sounds great.
Right?
Octoman freaked out everyone in Kentucky, like along the Ohio River in Covington. So.
Well, another type of story that we have in there, I'm the art director on the book and contribute stories to it as well. But another type of story is some of the personal experiences. We've had some creators, including Kat, who've done a story based on their own paranormal experiences.
Yeah. So for the first two issues, I have Adventures of Me Ghost Hunting, basically areas around Cincinnati. The first one is Sedansville Rectory, which is a now abandoned rectory in Sedansville, Ohio. And that's famous for having haunted priests in there, and ghosts, not actual priests, I don't think. And then also ghost dogs, because it was a former underground dogfighting ring location. That's very sad. But that's my encounter there, seeing a doppelganger. And then the second one is at the Sorg Opera House when I went to go help restore it, running into a 1920s flapper. So those are retold in graphic, not as in gory graphic, as in graphic novel graphic detail.
Yeah.
My contributions to the book tend to be a little more on the humorous side, a little less serious. And the first issue I did a Loveland Frogman story called Froggy Went A-Courtin', about the Frogman being on a Tinder date. And they've both lied about their profile.
It's so good.
It was fun to do.
Yeah.
For the third issue, I'm working on a script that Jay Callagayan wrote that I'm really excited about the Ohio Grassman. And he's being pursued by to be the spokesman of a medical marijuana company.
Yes. And for those of you who don't know who the Ohio Grassman is, it is the shorter cousin of Bigfoot, but has red hair, and I like to say it's my uncle. And what makes it notable is it makes nests out of grass in like the state forests around Ohio.
And I may have seen him when I was in college. I saw something, I swear.
That's fantastic. I'm learning so much about my own state that I didn't even know about.
Ohio is super weird. Like,
Yeah.
oh my, I joke that there is a joke that the most astronauts come out of Ohio because they're just trying to get off the face of out of the state. But we have such a strange and storied history from all the way up in Cleveland, all the way down to Cincinnati, Toledo. You've got some special times too, as well as Athens. And then, of course, we can't forget Columbus, who had the gigantic old prison that burnt down in 1935.
Yeah.
Killed
Yeah.
350 men. You can still hear them screaming when you go to the hockey arena.
I need to dig into that story a little bit more now.
Yeah, the hockey arena is where the old Ohio State Penitentiary used to be.
Okay.
So, yeah. And now you know why there was this massive piece of land that was just right there in the middle of the city available. So
like,
the urban explorers in the 90s have stories from visiting the place.
Wow. I have a feeling y'all are gonna send me down a rabbit hole after this interview is over. My wife will be like, "What are you doing?" Like, don't worry about it. I'm Googling stuff.
Yes. Welcome to the world of the strange and spooky.
So you mentioned Kat, your books, podcasts. Talk a little bit about maybe what you are working on the podcast, so if people are hearing you for the first time, that they can check it out.
Oh, sure. So, hello, everyone who's hearing me for the first time. My name is Kat Klockow, and I am the host of the Hometown Haunts podcast. Yeah, I travel far in my interests, which also can be listened to on Spotify and iTunes, and also on YouTube. You can probably find us at the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast, but we just call it Hometown Haunts. And we're actually celebrating our 100th episode this week, and it is our most fan requested location. So as a history writer, I basically write, as my co-hosts call it, Jen Kohler and Christina Wald are my co-hosts, and they're basically like, every week, Kat, you write a book report about a haunted location. And I'm like, yes, I do, because this is fun for me. Our most haunted location request is Bobby Mackey's Music World in Wilder, Kentucky. And it has taken 2 weeks to talk about everything that's happened there. So if you are listening now, those episodes are already out and ready for you to listen to. And yeah, enjoy. The other things that we have going on, we have this April, we have Zombio, a space adventure. It is written by my husband, Mike Klockow, when he was 9, and illustrated by me now, when I'm not 9. And it is an adaptation of his elementary school science fiction books and about how he goes to a world full of zombies outside of Pluto. So that comes out on April 27th. It debuts at the Alaska Minicon in Juneau, Alaska, and which I'll be at. And then in September, we have the first full graphic novel of Witches and Sorcerers, which is an early reader or young adult reader graphic novel. It's about a young witch who wants to become a sorceress, so she takes an internship from a very grumpy sorcerer. It's very fun, and if you're into Little Witch Academia or magic and sorcery type stories, this is a story that you'll enjoy. And then in October, our favorite, I almost called it a holiday. The entire month is a holiday. We have the Kickstarter for the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, issue number 3, Haunts and Horrors. And I unfortunately do not have the cover with me right now, but it is nearly complete. I can't wait to introduce a whole bunch of new creators to everyone. Everyone is from Ohio and has roots in Cincinnati. So that is what we're up to for this year. Tim, what are you up to this year?
Well, first, here, I don't know if you can see it. There is the tiny version of the cover for the 3rd issue of Cabinet of Curiosities. That's on the back cover of Frogman.
Thank you, Tim.
Ad for that. I'm kind of in between projects at the moment. I finished the Frogman thing in early December, and I'm in the process of not working for my publisher any longer until they actually pay me my royalties.
He's not talking about me.
I'm kind of on my own. I was delighted when Kat suggested that Corpse Flower would love to publish Frogman. I think we're going to work on a sequel to it, although I don't know if I can find any more Frogman stories. We may have to do UFO or ghost stories. But I did dig out a project that I had worked on a while back and then put aside. It was one of those cases where I just kind of got to a stopping point, and I've pulled it back out. I've started it again. It's going to be, oh, wait a minute, it's upside down. There we go. Sham Goes to the Movies. So it's a hi-fi sci-fi double feature with The Pervert from Planet X on one side, and then you flip the book over and start over again with When Egos Collide. Both of them are 1950s movie adaptations that were done in Fawcett comic books. Very, very good art. Kurt Schaffenberger does Planet X, and Al Williamson does When Worlds Collide. I'm about 3/4 of the way through this book at this point, and once I get it done, I'm going to start shopping it around for a new publisher.
Well, Kat, Tim, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about your work in comics and everything that you have going on. Where can people follow along with you to stay up to date? Because it sounds like you all have a lot coming this year, and people need to stay connected and get in the know.
Yeah, so the easiest way is to follow us on Corpse Flower Press. I update Corpse Flower Press on Instagram quite frequently. And also, you can check out everything that comes out right now at redcatcomics.com. I have to admit, my poor Corpse Flower Press comics.com account got hacked, so we had to move everything over to my private website. So that will be back. But right now, Red Cat Comics, you can remember it because my name is Kat. I got red hair and I draw comics. So, and that will have Frogman Funnies on it as well as any other updates.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I have all the books up for print on demand at indieplanet.com /Hooha, Hooha -comics. And I think that gets you to the page. There's about 40 books there, all the sham, all the humor stuff that I write and draw. And then I've got hoohacomics.com is basically just a portfolio, but it links to all the sales of the books. It's being redesigned at the moment to just bring it more current. And then I tinker around on a blog called The Zombie Marge, blogspot.com. And it's just, I preview stuff. I put up a lot of work there. I vent about stuff. It's just a fun place to go. And it's been sitting, unused for a couple of years now. And I'm giving it a refresh and going to start putting up some new material there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again both for taking some time out of your schedules to talk about Frogman Funnies and everything else that you all are creating. Gang, go link to all the stuff we talked about so you can go pick up comics that we've talked about on the show. We've talked about a lot. They'll be in the description of this video, or if you're listening on Spotify or podcast, Apple Podcasts, whatever, you can find it in the show notes there as well. Kat, Tim, thank you both again for taking some time to talk about your work in comics with me.
Thank you for having us. It was fun.
Yes, thank you. This was great.
Yeah. So, gang, with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.